Hey everybody, welcome to the OMG Tarot podcast. I'm not sure if it's like this where you are in the world, but where I am, we're currently having a downpour that's cooling us off from this crazy heat wave that's had temperatures up in the high 90s up to and beyond 100 Fahrenheit. So it's been hot. It's been a hot summer here in New Jersey. So this rain is pretty nice, and my plants are going to appreciate it too. And as far as those guys go, I've been having a nice time harvesting tomatoes for the past week and a half, and I'm looking forward to more of them ripening. So why am I bringing this all up? Why am I talking about the heat, the storm, and my tomato harvest? Well, because it's also July 31st, which means that tomorrow, August 1st, is Lammas. What's Lammas? Also known as Lughnasadh, it's the first harvest on the pagan calendar. Now, I tend to call it Lammas because Lughnasadh, I know how to pronounce it now, but if you've seen it written out, the pronunciation is not logical when you compare it to how it's spelled. So either name is acceptable. I've just gotten into the habit of calling it Lammas, and it's also easier to write. It's only a couple letters. But in any case, what it is the midway point between the summer solstice and the fall equinox. So you might be feeling like summer has been dragging on and gone on for so long, or you might be feeling like, how is it already almost August? The kids are almost back in school. I'm almost back into that yearly routine, which I realize a lot of this is very culturally coded to the part of the world where I live in, because in some parts of the United States, the kids are back in school, will be back in school very soon, and in other parts of the world, they didn't break. They go through the summer, so I get it. This is very America coded of the, all right, kids go back in September and then they're done in June, which not just America coded, that's very Northeast coded. Anyway, actually, we have 6 more weeks of summer. The autumn doesn't actually start till September 21st. But now that we're at that midway point, here's what's going on. Traditionally, this is the time to start harvesting your summer crops. It's time to start picking your tomatoes off the vines and enjoying your peppers, and it's also time to start planning for your fall garden. Right now is when you want to start planting things like cauliflower, broccoli, all of those guys. Of course, naturally, location dependent. You might be in a hotter or cooler climate than I am, but a lot of these planting and harvesting guidelines that get baked into the pagan calendar are from climates that are fairly similar to the one that I live in. So just adjust it a little bit because around here it typically doesn't really still feel like summer around the fall equinox, but I wonder how much of that is due to the weather cooling off and the days getting shorter, and also how much of that is artificially and culturally created. Once the pumpkin spice latte comes out and people start wanting to go to pumpkin patches and go apple picking, it feels like we just mentally put ourselves in fall mode. Perhaps if we didn't have those things, maybe summer would feel longer. But anyway, my point here is not to talk about pumpkin picking or flannels, or really, I guess those are kind of adjacent. Today we're going to be talking about the pagan calendar as a whole and dropping it into the astrological calendar to just get a better feel for that rhythm of the seasons. And let's say that between this podcast and whatever else you're consuming on social media, you're getting a lot of kind of witch talk and witch Instagram things showing up on your For You page, and you're like, Lammas, what's that? Yule, isn't that Christmas? This will ideally give you some context. And it'll also help you connect these 8 sabbats to the astrological wheel and help you deepen your connection with your astrological practice. Now, that said, if you've taken my class in person, you've probably heard me rattle off, this isn't Wicca 101, when we inevitably go down a tangent about something like Lammas or Samhain, or really anything that is a spiritual practice that isn't directly relevant to tarot. But they're often interconnected, and that's why we end up on those tangents. So I kind of have to bring the class back to tarot, but also want to explain these things, and that's what I'm going to be doing here. So strap in, have fun, and let's talk about the Wheel of the Year. So normally, I would actually start this with Yule, the winter solstice, but it's not December 21st right now. It is about to be August 1st, so we're going to start with Lammas. Why not? First, I'd like to give you a bit more context. I dropped the words pagan and Wiccan earlier, and I want to emphasize that this concept of the Wheel of the Year did not specifically come from Wicca. Wicca is a New Age religion that was created in the 1960s by a man named Gerald Gardner. To a lot of people, The terms Wiccan and pagan are synonymous, but that's actually not correct. What Gardner did was collected traditions and rituals from various practices from around the world and kind of synchronized them together to create something very specific and also very much of its era. It's a religion created in the middle of the 20th century that in a lot of ways feels like a response to the world in the middle of the 20th century. And by that I mean there's an emphasis on returning to nature and returning to traditional practices, or at least practices that were perceived to be traditional. So I don't want to get too deep into the roots of Wicca here because that's not what this episode's about, but if you're interested, I encourage you to do some more research, and maybe I'll pick up this topic in a future episode. For some more context, pagan is a broad term that refers to any and pretty much all earth-based religions. And this idea of the Wheel of the Year has roots stretching back far, far, and we're going to get into the different sabbats and how we see them celebrated even today in certain cultures. But it was really synchronized and popularized in the format we're going to be talking through by the Neopagans, so movements much like and including Wicca that cropped up in the 20th century as a means to feel like they were returning to nature and returning to old-timey practices. And Neopaganism is flourishing today. You can absolutely find groups and people who follow this Wheel of the Year, who do rituals and sabbats, and you can find traditional Wiccans, you can find there's Dianic Wicca, there's all sorts of offshoots, just like really any religion is going to have all different sects. I mean, it's really not all that different from, say, how Christianity has the Catholics, the Methodists, the Mormons, all of the aboves. So Lammas, as the first harvest, is a festival of the fruits of your labor. It's the point at which you get to enjoy everything that you've grown and everything that you've been putting effort into up to this point. The name Lammas actually has some connection to the name Loaf Mass because it's a celebration of we've harvested the wheat and now we're going to bake a loaf and we're going to enjoy it. It's honestly a pretty upbeat, fun Sabbath. It's, hey, cool, we've been partying, all right, let's have ourselves a barbecue with the food we've gathered. And that's really how you celebrate Lammas. In some traditions, a loaf of bread is baked in the shape of a person, or you'd make like a corn doll, and then sacrifice that and eat it and consume it as an offering of gratitude for successful harvest. So think things like summer barbecues and potlucks and time you spend at them with the people that you love on these days that are still hot, still long, but markedly getting shorter from this point out. I think it's also worth noting that Lammas falls during Leo season, so think about all the traits of Leo, being our fixed fire sign. Leo burns bright. Leo is that big hot sun. Leo is that barbecue that's grilling up all the burgers. Leo is that fire pit that's keeping the conversation going late into the night. Also, remember what I said in the astrological axes episode where Aquarius will do everything they can to support society and Leo expects society to do everything it can to support them? I'm paraphrasing a bit, but think about that too. This is the harvest, so it's the first taking of and enjoying of everything that you've worked hard. The time for delayed gratification is over. Gratification's here. Leo likes to indulge. Leo knows what they want and they take it. And also Leo's generous. They're not selfish at all, but Leo's going to be the one holding the torch so that everybody else gets warm and can have some light. There's a bit of main character energy, but it's benevolent main character energy. 6 weeks after Lammas, we have the fall equinox, also known as Mabon. This is the day where the light and the dark are exactly equal. One thing to note is that when it's Mabon in the northern hemisphere, it's Ostara in the southern hemisphere, and they all reverse like that because that's how seasons work. Mabon is our second harvest. This is the big harvest. It's sometimes known as the Witches' Thanksgiving. And to compare it with Lammas, which was about the first fruits of the harvest and really has a focus on bread and grains, Mabon is more about everything that you're harvesting. So bread and grains for sure, but other stuff too. Now we are firmly heading into the cooler, darker days, and as winter approaches, we're going to need to store our stuff because these were brought up before things like refrigeration and freezers and grocery stores. Mabon is where you all come together and enjoy the bounty. The people connect, they band together because, as I just mentioned, winter is coming, so enjoy the feast and also strengthen those relationships. See your friends, see your loved ones, see your neighbors, especially if you live in an agrarian society where your neighbor might not be right next door, they might be a few miles away. Dropping it onto the astrological calendar, This is also the first day of Libra season, so think about Libra. Libra is our cardinal air sign, so what does that mean? Well, Libra kicks off connection between people. Libra exchanges ideas. So as you're gathered around the feast table eating yet another piece of cornbread, you're chatting with your neighbor about what you're going to do this winter. Are you going to tap your trees for some maple syrup? Are you canning up lots and lots of tomatoes? That way you can keep on making chicken parm all through the winter. I know I'm mixing old school and new school things here, but that's kind of the point, is that with our fall equinox, we are starting off Libra season. So ushering in all of those things like an exchange of ideas and a greater feeling of connection with your community. For Mabon, think about the kids are back in school. It's parent-teacher conference time if you're a parent. Fall sports are underway, and you're probably starting to make plans for holiday stuff. Whose house are you visiting this Christmas? What's your kid dressing up as for Halloween? We're in quarter 4. It's time for flannels, and it's time for pumpkin spice stuff, and it's time for all of those things that really feel very connective. Following Mabon, you've got Samhain. This is the third harvest. It's celebrated on the 1st of November, and it's often conflated with Halloween. Now, are there some shared traditions? Yes. Is there some crossover? Absolutely. But I want to stay focused on the Samhain side of it, not the Halloween side of it here, because although they're very intertwined, I personally think of them as a bit different in terms of one's the third harvest, the other is for dressing up in costumes and eating candy and doing all sorts of fun, spooky stuff like that. Staying focused on Samhain, the goal here is to finish the harvest, so any leftover, lingering vegetables or tubers or anything that was around is getting harvested now. It's the end. Winter will be here in just 6 weeks, so you're taking really your last sweep of everything that you cultivated in the previous growing season. And think about this imagery and how it lines up with the Death card, because Death, Scorpio, Samhain. Samhain falls during Scorpio season, so think about that type of imagery. We're clearing out what's no longer useful in order to make room for what comes next. There's transformation happening, and there's connection with the taboo side of things. Notably, this is typically considered the point in the year where the veil between the living and the dead is the thinnest. Some traditions also maintain that the veil is thin right around Beltane, which is the 6-month opposite of Samhain, which we'll talk about in a few. But with this in mind, this is why traditions like Dia de los Muertos and All Souls Day are right around the Samhain holiday. It's often considered to be a time of remembrance for those who have passed on, and as you're taking that final harvest, you're supposed to provide an offering for them as a way to say, hey, we're still thinking about you. We're still celebrating you. We recognize that you're no longer with us, but you're still with us in memory and in spirit. In some traditions, Samhain is often considered the last Sabbat, and then after that, Yule is the first Sabbat of the new year. Now, keep in mind that the wheel of the year is depicted as a wheel, so it's continuous. So not everybody believes that there's a defined ending and beginning, but it can be kind of helpful to think of it as, all right, it's our third harvest, we've taken everything we can, and now it's time to start fresh and start anew. That's what Yule is all about. Yule is the winter solstice. In the Northern Hemisphere, it falls on December 21st, and in the Southern Hemisphere, it's on June 21st. And now let's set the stage for Yule. It's cold. The days are extremely short. The nights are long. The trees are barren, and all the fruits have been harvested. What kind of mindset are you in right now? Well, you're probably looking forward to the spring to come again, and you're probably looking forward to a return of the light. You might even be spending a lot of time focusing on what are you going to do next year? How are you going to spend your spring and your summer? Maybe to put into a modern context, you're just spending some time right around the end of the year thinking about, where do I want to travel next summer? It's a quiet, contemplative time of year. But you might also be doing some celebrating with friends and loved ones. In fact, while you're all going through it, dealing with the dark, cold days, you might get together and share gifts, and you might brighten up those dark days with candles and with bonfires. There's a reason why multiple cultures all around the world have a lights festival right around the winter solstice. There's Hanukkah, there's Lucia's Day, there's Christmas, all of them incorporate some theme of light because that light is there to light us up during these dark days. And there's also a theme of hope that runs through them, a hope for continued well-being through the winter. There's a reason why you'll see a lot of symbolism of evergreen trees and stuff right around Yule. It's because those plants make it through the winter. They don't go dormant or die, they just keep on surviving. So to drop it into an astrological context, this is also the first day of Capricorn season. Remember what I said about that sense of hope? Capricorn's the ambitious one. Think of that symbolism of the mountain goat climbing their way up the steep face of a mountain. Capricorn is goals and its ambitions, but it's also grounded, it's practical, and very down to the brass tacks of what actually needs to happen. And while you're spending this slower time of year in your home, reflecting, thinking about what my future is going to look like, you're doing goal setting and you're thinking about your ambitions. You're getting practical with yourself of, all right, what's next for me? Think about that in the context of New Year's resolutions. You're thinking about what you're going to do differently or what you're going to do the same, maybe improve upon or innovate. I think it's always kind of fun to take a look at these holidays and these traditions and then put them against our modern world because although these are kind of old school and in some cases super ancient, they're relevant. I think that's why they endure. Now, one thing to note is that I can't possibly cover every single detail about every single Sabbat on the Wheel of the Year in this podcast. I suppose I could, but then that would be a really, really long episode. It might even make sense to have an episode about each Sabbat, and maybe someday we'll have something like that. But just know that there's a whole lot more to each Sabbat than what I'm going into, just because there are so many different regional and cultural variations. In studying them a bit more, you'll come across archetypes like the Holly King and the Oak God and the Green Man and the Goddess. I'm trying to keep things a little more surface level here and just a bit more, how does this relate to the astrological year? Kind of broad brushes. But I encourage you to research more. If this is something you're interested in, absolutely go down these rabbit holes, read for yourself. So following Yule, 6 weeks or so, give or take, we have Imbolc. This is celebrated on February 1st, and I'm technically an Imbolc baby because in some traditions, the celebration actually begins at sundown the night prior. So if Imbolc is February 1st, you really start celebrating it January 31st. So there you go. But what else falls right around February 1st? In fact, the next day. Groundhog Day, and this is something that it took me way too long to put 2 and 2 together, but I keep saying 6 weeks, because it is approximately 6 weeks between each Sabbat on the Wheel of the Year. But what else is 6 weeks following Groundhog Day? The spring equinox. So really, regardless of whether the groundhog sees its shadow or not, you still have 6 more weeks of winter. I know it's kind of folksy of like, oh, spring will come early, 6 more weeks of winter, okay. Well, yeah, no, you're actually, Imbolc is that midpoint between your winter solstice and your spring equinox. And so I guess the day that I'm recording this, July 31st, it's kind of like the summertime Groundhog Day. So I guess what would our summer version be? Seagull Day? If the seagull caws 3 times and steals your bag of potato chips, that means 6 more weeks of summer? But bringing it back to Imbolc, as this midpoint between the winter and the spring, a lot of its themes have to do with nature making good on its promises for that hope that you had back at Yule. In other words, the days are now notably longer. In some climates, you might be starting to see some plants poking out of the ground, but not in all climates. But there is that sense of spring is coming in the air. And so it's associated with purification and rededication. You made those promises to yourself at Yule. Now it's time to revisit them. Are you going to actually start making good on them and working toward your goals? Or is it time to realign and rethink them before you actually are thrown into the thick of things? Remember, this is largely through the context of being a farmer. So let's say in the winter you decided which crops you're going to plant. Then by early February, you're like, actually, I think I'm going to do Romanesco instead of regular broccoli this year. Now's the time to do it because once things are in the ground, you're committed. And in terms of astrology, This is during Aquarius season, so it's your chance to think a little bit differently and maybe think about things from a somewhat different perspective before you commit. It's time to reconsider those goals that you set and ultimately commit yourself to goals that make sense for you and really align with you and what you're after. Because Aquarius isn't just the rebel. Aquarius is also a fixed sign, so just like Leo is that fixed, burning, bright fire, Aquarius is your fixed air sign, so Aquarius can be very stuck on ideas and very committed to ideas. Maybe that's a better way of putting it, but dogmatic is a word that gets bandied about frequently for this sign, and I think that this sense of recommitment that comes with Imbolc is very on brand for that Aquarius dogmatism. Once you're finally done with those 6 more weeks of winter, it's spring! Thank goodness. Maybe some of you listening enjoy the cold weather. I don't. But now here we are at Ostara, the spring equinox. Once again, you get an equal amount of light and darkness. And from here on out, the days just keep getting longer. This is when, in most climates, we're starting to see spring is underway. Plants are starting to poke out of the ground. Baby animals are starting to be born. Generally, it feels like the earth is coming back to life. It's a celebration of births and beginnings. It's also the first day of Aries season, so it's the start of the new astrological year. And when we think about Aries energy, Aries is that cardinal fire sign, the one who kicks things off and gets things started. It's the spark that leads to the fire. And just like with the winter solstice, where we see multiple cultures have created holidays that have very similar themes, we see this with the spring equinox. You'll see Nowruz, you'll see Easter, you'll see Passover. These all have themes of rebirth and starting fresh. Following the spring equinox, we have Beltane. This occurs in the northern hemisphere on May 1st and in the southern hemisphere on November 1st. Beltane is the flower festival. This is also the one that's often associated with dancing around the maypole. If you've ever been to a Beltane festival or seen maypole stuff happen, you know it's pretty cool. It's for those who haven't, there's typically a giant pole, like maybe the size of a telephone pole, maybe not quite as big, and up top it has a flower crown, just like a huge giant-sized flower crown, and also the people participating are largely wearing flower crowns. But at the bottom of that crown, there's all different ribbons, and the people down below, each who are standing on the ground, hold on to an end of a ribbon, and someone might start playing some music or beating a drum, and they just dance around the maypole, kind of twirling in and out, essentially braiding all their ribbons together around the pole to celebrate the coming together of multiple forces to make spring happen, essentially. It's a fertility festival. It's a festival of the life is now back and in full bloom. We got flowers everywhere. The baby animals, they're not just born, they're getting cute. Leaves are back on the trees. People are excited to be outside again. Summer is coming. In fact, we're halfway there. It's only 6 more weeks till summer. In German-speaking countries, it's also known as Walpurgis Night because it's the eve of the feast day of Saint Walpurga. And during the Republican era of ancient Rome, this was also when Floralia was celebrated. This was a 6-day festival that had games and just general pleasure-seeking and just generally fun times. It was to celebrate the goddess Flora, who was the goddess of spring and flowers. So again, we see this repetition of themes across time periods and cultures. Beltane occurs during Taurus season, so think about Taurian themes. Taurus is very sensual and very pleasure-seeking. I know Taurus kind of gets a rap for not wanting to get out of bed and just sit around and eat all day, which, okay, maybe some of them do, but Taurus likes what they like. In fact, they love what they like. They seek comfort and pleasure and just beautiful, delicious, wonderful things above all else. Taurus lives in the here and now. And that's Beltane energy. It's the warmth of the sun on your face. It's being surrounded by blooming flowers and the calls of all the songbirds who are now back from wherever they migrated to for the winter. It's laying down on your back on the nice lush grass and letting your bare feet touch the dirt and really ground you. You're like a bull in the pasture. You're just enjoying the day, vibing, loving the environment around you because it's so fresh and renewed and full of life. And following Beltane, we have Litha, the summer solstice, the longest, brightest day of the year. Litha is a celebration of the sun. A lot of times when people do rituals for Litha, they're held at high noon because they're held under that big, bright sun. Sometimes it's known as midsummer. This is the point at which, if you're all the way at the poles, you'll have a 24-hour day, which I would like to experience someday. I just really think it'd be super cool to go and experience 24 hours of sunlight in some far north city. Litha is also the first day of Cancer season, which isn't fiery at all. It's your cardinal water sign. One connection between Cancer and Litha that I saw that I thought might be kind of interesting to share actually comes from the writings of Bede, an English monk who lived from 672 to 735 AD. In his work, The Reckoning of Time, he wrote out a list of the Anglo-Saxon names for the months of the early Germanic calendar, which were already obsolete in his time, but he discussed Litha, and he described it as such. Litha means gentle or navigable because in both of these months the calm breezes are gentle and they are wont to sail upon the smooth sea. I feel like that quote has some Cancer energy to it. And I think a song lyric that has some very similar energy to that is that Sublime song where it's like, summertime, when living is easy. But because the sun is at maximum strength for Litha, you'll see a lot of celebrations incorporate fire in some way. Depending on the culture, you might see bonfires, you might see fire walking. You might also see it associated with St. John's Day. This is the feast day of John the Baptist, and it's yet another example of how, once Europe became Christian, certain pagan traditions were recontextualized to fit Christianity. In this interpretation, you might see bonfires referred to as St. John's fires, and traditionally, these were meant to drive dragons away. And I know sometimes this recontextualization is referred to as stealing, and perhaps in certain cases that's accurate, but I think it's also worth noting that there's just a lot of cultural exchange, and over the centuries, cultures and traditions and religious practices get meshed together and meshed and evolved together in twisty and turny ways. And maybe the one way that I can relate this back to tarot is that when you work with tarot cards, I feel like there's a lot of just different cultural and historical strings to pull on and explore. All these little rabbit holes, like do you want to explore the astrological associations? Do you want to explore what Pamela Coleman Smith meant when she incorporated lots of Egyptian imagery in her deck? Because if you follow that path, then you find yourself researching Hermeticism. And then as you research Hermeticism, you might find yourself researching ancient Greek religion and ancient Egyptian religion, and how and why did a bunch of 19th century Londoners decide to revive this ancient, largely forgotten about set of practices and rituals. That's also how we end up going down tangents in the tarot classes I teach. Inevitably, somebody has a question, and to answer it fully, I need to provide context. So, next thing you know, we're going down a rabbit hole talking about Litha and Samhain and the whole wheel of the year. I also tell my students this a bunch. Your tarot deck is a gateway drug for all other witchy things. No matter what, you think you're just going to be pulling cards? Yeah, that's great. See you at the moon ritual. So, that's the wheel of the year. I know it was a bit of a detour from what we normally do on this podcast, but I thought it was some information worth sharing. Next week, tune in for more of your regularly scheduled tarot content, and keep following because in the next couple of weeks, we've got some cool things happening. I think there's going to be a bit more discussion of other forms of divination, and there's a couple cool interviews coming your way, so definitely stay tuned, and if you aren't subscribed yet, subscribe to me now, whether you're on Apple, Spotify, any of the above. And as always, if you like what you heard, please leave me a 5-star review. It really does count, like it helps a lot, seriously. But also, keep up with me. Over on Instagram, my handle is its_omg_tarot, and my website is omgtarot.com. One thing that I've been sort of kicking around lately, and if anyone would like to weigh in on this, either in my DMs or in the comments on the show, or really anywhere, is I'm thinking about doing something with Patreon, or maybe buy me a coffee. Namely, if things were to go in that direction, I think the content that would be over there exclusively for subscribers would be more geared toward running a tarot business, so the normal free version of the show would keep being about tarot and astrology in general. But if you are interested in starting your own tarot business or just listening to me talk even more, that's what that would be. It'd be for subscribers who are interested in maybe doing this professionally. We'll see, though. That's down the line, and if that happens, don't worry, I'll announce it everywhere. Until then, keep on listening, keep on being awesome, and have yourself a blessed Lammas. Bye-bye.